On an island shrouded in the mist of history, a man destined to change the world was slowly taking shape. He was not only a military genius, but also a symbol of an era. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, a legendary journey from Corsica to Waterloo. Here, a young mind captivated by the art of war was being molded into a strategist. But what drove this young Corsican from being an obscure student to becoming an empire builder who shook the world? In an era of turmoil, he rose from chaos with his extraordinary military prowess and iron-fisted political strategies. But this is just the beginning of the story. Napoleon's ambitions extended far beyond the borders of France. Join us to explore the early life of this legendary figure, witness the birth of an empire, and unveil the true face of one of history's greatest military leaders. This is not just a retrospective of history, it's a journey through time, a deep dive into the mind and spirit of Napoleon Bonaparte. In the intricate tapestry of French history, the name of Napoleon Bonaparte occupies a prominent place. His beginning was in 1769 on the island of Corsica, a small isle in the Mediterranean, also the homeland of his family. Napoleon was born into the Bonaparte family, a noble household with Italian ancestry. His father, Carlo, was a lawyer and also involved in Corsican political affairs. His mother, Letizia, was known for her strong and frugal character. Within this family, Napoleon had 8 siblings, being the second son himself. Although the Bonaparte family held a noble title, their financial situation was not affluent. This was mainly because Corsica was not an economically prosperous area at the time, coupled with poor management of the family's wealth. Additionally, Carlo Bonaparte had expended a considerable portion of the family resources in supporting the Corsican independence movement. Therefore, despite their noble status, the family's daily life was relatively simple, far from the traditional sense of aristocratic luxury. Against this backdrop, Napoleon's early life was not all smooth sailing. His parents had high hopes for his education, especially when he was sent to France for military training. This experience laid the foundation for his future military career, but also revealed his conflicts and contradictions with traditional aristocratic values. At the young age of 9, Napoleon was sent to the Brienne military school, far from his homeland, where his childhood was no longer about play and carefree laughter, but overshadowed by strict discipline and relentless military training. In this lonely and cold environment, Napoleon's heart nurtured an indomitable force. He sought comfort in books and war theories, particularly in the study of the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Caesar, which ignited his desire for conquest and strategy. His intelligence and tactics gradually became evident in the military school's classrooms and exercises, especially during a simulated war game where his unique tactics and decisive decision-making left everyone in awe. However, what truly shaped Napoleon's destiny was a storm sweeping through France, the Great Revolution. August 27, 1793, amidst the torrent of the French Revolution, Toulon became a strategic location. The Royalists handed over the city and the French Mediterranean fleet to the anti-French coalition, and the Allied forces quickly took control of Toulon. The revolutionary French army began its assault, but faced with the sturdy defenses of the Allied forces, the prospects for the French army seemed bleak. At this critical moment, Napoleon visited the headquarters of the French forces besieging Toulon. Due to a lack of an artillery commander on the right flank, Napoleon's old friend Salicetti recommended him for the position. Upon arriving at the front, Napoleon found that the besieging troops lacked sufficient artillery and well-trained soldiers. He acted swiftly, gathering over 100 cannons and ammunition, and commandeered factories to produce military supplies. Discontent with the command ability of the siege's general commander Carteau, Napoleon proposed his own battle plan to his superior Lazare Carnot and requested to replace Carteau. Although Carnot was impressed by his plan, he had already dispatched General François Dapet to take over as the general commander. On November 15th, the French army launched an attack on the Malbousquet fort, with Napoleon leading his troops directly to the entrance of the fortress. However, Dapet's sudden order to withdraw infuriated him. On November 17th, General Jacques Dugommier took over command from Dapet and began to implement Napoleon's plan. On December 17th, Napoleon and Captain Muiron's troops attacked the Malbousquet fort, while Massena's troops simultaneously attacked the Fort Leguillette. After gaining control of all the fortress's artillery, Napoleon ordered a bombardment of the Allied fleet in the harbor. The next day, the Allied forces evacuated Toulon, significantly showcasing Napoleon's strategic talent. This victory marked not only a turning point in Napoleon's military career, but also a pivotal moment in his personal destiny. On December 22nd, the 24-year-old Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general, beginning to attract the attention of national leaders. These events not only demonstrated his military genius, but also showed his ability to seize opportunities in turbulent times. In the torrent of the French Revolution, Napoleon's fate seemed to fluctuate continuously. In 1794, he was appointed as the commander of the artillery of the Italian Legion, a position that allowed him to participate in several small but key victories. During this period, Napoleon became acquainted with Augustin Robespierre, the brother of Jacobin leader Maximilien Robespierre. However, with the occurrence of the Thermidorian reaction, he was temporarily imprisoned due to his association with Augustin Robespierre, and later released due to insufficient evidence. In 1795, Napoleon's life seemed to enter a new phase. He embarked with an expeditionary force comprising 15 ships and 16,900 soldiers, attempting to recapture Corsica, but this mission was unsuccessful. In the same year, he got engaged to his longtime love interest Désirée Clary, but this romance ultimately did not culminate in marriage. During this time, Napoleon also wrote a romantic novel titled Clisson and Eugénie, which appears to be his farewell to this unfulfilled love. The political situation in France in 1795 was still tumultuous. On August 22nd, the French National Convention passed a new constitution, leading to a new round of political instability. In March 1796, Napoleon was appointed as the commander of the Italian Legion, commencing his military campaign in Italy. He employed a strategy of dividing the enemy forces and inflicted significant losses on the Austrian army in the Battle of Dago, showcasing his tactical prowess. The Battle of Lodi on May 10th was a pivotal engagement, where Napoleon's forces successfully breached the Austrian lines, enhancing his stature within the army. He then quickly occupied the Duchy of Milan and continued to exert pressure on the Austrian forces. By June, his army had surrounded Mantua, an important fortress in northern Italy. In July 1796, Napoleon initiated the Siege of Mantua, a strategic point garrisoned by about 13,000 Austrian troops. Under Napoleon's command, the French army of about 44,000 men was divided into several corps, including those led by André Massena, Pierre Augereau, and Pierre Serrurier. On the Austrian side, the experienced Field Marshal Wurmser replaced Beaulieu, commanding an army of about 50,000 men. Wurmser's forces launched a two-pronged attack from Tyrol, but his main army was reduced to 25,000 men during the march. By the end of July, Wurmser's main forces briefly engaged and repelled the French, forcing Napoleon to abandon the siege of Mantua. In early August, Napoleon regrouped his troops to confront the Austrian army, successfully compelling 3,000 Austrian soldiers to surrender. On August 5th, Napoleon encountered Wurmser's troops at Castiglione, where the French held a numerical advantage. By the end of August, Wurmser's forces, having been reinforced, reached a strength of 45,000 men. However, in the early September Battle of Rovereto, the French defeated Davidovich's Austrian troops. Subsequently, Napoleon ordered his troops to continue the pursuit, capturing over 1,500 Austrian soldiers on September 7th. On September 8th, the French once again defeated the Austrians in the Battle of Bassano, causing significant Austrian casualties and captures. In late October 1796, the Austrian army, under the command of Field Marshal Joseph Alvinci, commenced their third attempt to relieve Mantua. Alvinci commanded a force of about 28,000 men, supplemented by Paul Davidovich's 20,000 troops in Tyrol, bringing the total Austrian strength close to 50,000. They planned a two-pronged attack, one towards Bassano and the other towards Trento. At this time, Napoleon's field forces numbered about 30,000. He dispatched Vaubois with 10,000 men to guard Trento, Massena with 10,000 men stationed at Bassano, and Augereau's division as a reserve force of 10,000 men. In early November, Davidovich's troops forced Vaubois to retreat to Cagliano, while Alvinci's forces compelled Massena to evacuate Bassano. On November 6th, Napoleon ordered an attack with 16,000 men on Alvinci's position at Bassano, but after a failed assault, he was forced to retreat and contract his lines. Simultaneously, Vaubois, to the west, faced another defeat in the Battle of Cagliano and was forced to withdraw to Rivoli. On November 12th, Napoleon launched another attack on the Austrian forces at Caldiero, but due to adverse weather conditions, the attack failed again. At this point, Napoleon faced a severe crisis, with his army at a disadvantage on multiple fronts. However, Napoleon did not give up. On November 14th, he gathered 17,000 troops from Massena and Augereau for a daring flanking maneuver, aiming to cut off Alvinci's rear. In the following days, Napoleon's forces fought fiercely at Arcola and Arcole, eventually succeeding in repelling the Austrian army. By January 1797, Austrian Field Marshal Alvinci organized another massive relief operation, dividing his troops into 3 columns for the attack. However, Napoleon's forces performed excellently in the Battle of Rivoli, successfully repelling the Austrian attack and nearly annihilating the Austrian field forces in the following days. In February 1797, Napoleon initiated a punitive campaign against the Papal States. His troops defeated the Papal army in the Battle of Faenza and swiftly advanced into Papal territory. On February 19th, the Treaty of Tolentino was signed, forcing the Pope to cede territories like Bologna and Ferrara to France, giving Napoleon a significant foothold in the Adriatic Sea. By this time, Napoleon's army had been reinforced to nearly 80,000 men, including his 44,000-strong main corps, 20,000 under Joubert in Tyrol, and 15,000 garrison troops in the Papal States and Lombardy. On March 10th, the French forces departed from their bases, with Napoleon leading 35,000 men in 2 columns towards the Valvasone area near the Tagliamento River. There, they successfully repelled the Austrian army and regrouped at Valvasone on March 16th. Meanwhile, Massena pursued Lusignan's troops and captured 500 men, including Lusignan, at Longueron on March 14th. In the Battle of Valvasone, Napoleon defeated the newly appointed Austrian commander, Archduke Charles. The Austrian army was forced to retreat in 2 directions, but Massena occupied and secured the Tarvis Pass on March 21st, annihilating the Austrian forces attempting to retreat through Tarvis. Subsequently, Massena continued to lead the French offensive and occupied Loben on April 7th. On April 18th, a representative of Holy Roman Emperor Francis II signed the preliminary Peace of Leoben with Napoleon, marking the end of the First Coalition War. According to the treaty, France acquired the Austrian Netherlands, German territories on the left bank of the Rhine, and the entire northern Italy. In this campaign, the French army suffered 45,000 casualties, but captured 160,000 coalition soldiers and conquered the whole of northern Italy. Napoleon thus became a hero, acclaimed for both fame and success, started to dominate the negotiations with Austria, and intervened in the coup of 18 Fructidor on September 4, 1797. Afterwards, Napoleon turned towards Egypt, embarking on the famous Egyptian-Syrian campaign. His army not only included 2,000 cannons, but also 175 scholars and a large amount of books and research equipment. In Egypt, they discovered the Rosetta Stone, which had a significant impact on the study of ancient Egyptian civilization. In the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon defeated a Mamluk army of 100,000 with a force of 25,000. But later, at the Battle of the Nile, the French naval fleet was destroyed by British Admiral Nelson, leading to the troops being stranded in Egypt without supplies. Eventually, in 1799, Napoleon returned to France, but his original plan to invade India was hindered, and he suffered heavy personnel losses. In October 1799, Napoleon returned to France, where he was warmly welcomed and revered by the public. At that time, France's situation was improving, with Massena achieving victory in the Battle of Zurich and Brune defeating the Anglo-Russian coalition in the Netherlands, leading to Russia's withdrawal from the Second Coalition against France. However, the incompetence of the Directory had deeply ingrained itself in the public's mind, and the positive developments didn't change this perception. Many ambitious figures began to see Napoleon as an ideal candidate to replace the Directory. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon, along with his allies, orchestrated a coup d'état, securing the support of the Parisian military. They moved the legislature from the Tuileries Palace to the more remote St. Cloud Palace. There, Napoleon attempted to address the legislators but faced fierce opposition. Ultimately, with the help of his brother Lucien, the legislative guard cleared the chamber, effectively suspending the operations of the legislative body. Napoleon subsequently became one of the three consuls, and on December 24, 1799, promulgated the Constitution of the Year, officially becoming the first consul of France. He held executive authority, with the power to enact laws and appoint or dismiss officials. Under his leadership, France underwent a series of reforms, including protecting property rights to win over the business class, establishing the National Gendarmerie, and judicial reforms to tackle banditry. He actively recruited talents from different factions and persuaded exiles to return, gaining support from the old regime's nobility. Napoleon established a highly centralized administrative structure, altered the local government election system, and successfully reformed the economy. He founded the Bank of France, stabilizing the French currency and exchange rates, providing financial support for future wars. Additionally, he resolved the religious divisions since the Revolution by negotiating with the Papal States, establishing Catholicism as the main religion in France. In early 1800, Napoleon planned to recapture northern Italy, proposing to Minister of War Berthier the formation of a 60,000-strong army of reserve. To deceive the enemy, he publicly inspected a temporary force composed of veterans and recruits in Dijon, while the French propaganda machinery worked overtime, leading the anti-French coalition to underestimate the combat capability of the French army. In May, Napoleon led the reserve army across the Alps to march into northern Italy. They traversed rugged mountain paths and thick snow, facing immense challenges. Simultaneously, 4 other divisions set out under Napoleon's orders, advancing through different mountain passes, forming a multi-directional offensive towards northern Italy. Napoleon's troops engaged in intense battle with the Austrian army on the Marengo Plain. After a series of tactical maneuvers and fierce combat, the French army eventually achieved a decisive victory. The number of French casualties, wounded and captured in this battle is unknown, but Napoleon's close friend, General Desaix, was unfortunately killed in action. Despite his grief over the death of his friend, Napoleon still fabricated Desaix's last words and aspects of the battle for political purposes. This victory compelled Austrian General Melas to sign the Convention of Alessandria, withdrawing to Austrian territory. Subsequently, France and Austria signed the Treaty of Luneville, with Austria withdrawing from the war. As continental allies withdrew from the conflict, Britain, ultimately compelled by the changing tides of war, signed the Treaty of Amiens with France in 1802, bringing an end to the Second Coalition War. Post the Battle of Marengo, Napoleon's power reached an unprecedented peak, enabling him to initiate a series of profound reforms throughout France. He presided over the drafting of the Napoleonic Code, a legal framework that not only met the rationalist aspirations of the early revolutionary period, but also remains a cornerstone of the continental legal system, influencing legislation in numerous countries to this day. Proclaiming the end of the French Revolution, Napoleon proudly declared that the revolution had returned to its foundational principles. Economically, Napoleon vigorously endorsed the development of capitalism, establishing the Bank of France and stabilizing the French currency. His policies quadrupled France's textile output in less than a decade and spurred industrial growth in northern Italy and German regions. Moreover, he implemented the metric system, standardizing measurements around kilograms and meters, and abolished many feudal practices in Western Europe, such as manorialism, merchant and artisan guilds, while also revoking discriminatory policies against Jews, ingraining the principle of legal equality for all. However, in his colonial policies, Napoleon controversially reinstated slavery. He once planned to rebuild the French colonial empire in the New World, but due to difficulties encountered there, such as yellow fever and uprisings by Native Americans, he ultimately sold Louisiana to the United States for $15 million, thus ending his colonial ventures in the Americas. In 1804, upon the suggestion of the French Senate and to secure national stability and his own legacy, Napoleon was proposed to establish an alternative system. With widespread public support, Napoleon was officially granted the title of Emperor of France by a decree of the Senate, marking the establishment of the Napoleonic dynasty. He appointed 6 distinguished individuals to form the Imperial Council and merged the Consular Guard with the Legislative Guard to create the Imperial Guard, bestowing the title of Marshal of the Empire on 18 meritorious generals. Napoleon's ascension to emperor was widely endorsed by the people in a national referendum. On December 2, 1804, Napoleon and Josephine held a grand coronation ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Adorned in a gold-threaded satin robe and a velvet cloak themed with golden bees, Napoleon arrived at Notre Dame in a lavish coronation carriage. During the ceremony, he used 2 crowns, a golden laurel wreath representing the Roman Empire and a replica of Charlemagne's coronation crown, symbolizing self-coronation. After the Mass, Napoleon took the coronation oath, a moment that became a significant milestone in the history of his reign. In 1803, Britain declared war on France, ending a brief period of peace. Napoleon quickly assembled a formidable army, preparing to invade England. This army, known for its exceptional quality and mobility, was considered an unparalleled war machine at the time. However, facing Britain's proactive alliance strategy. Napoleon shifted his focus to the European continent, intending to defeat Austria before Russian forces could arrive. In 1805, Napoleon personally commanded the campaign to the east, swiftly occupying Munich and annihilating a large Austrian force with minimal losses at the Battle of Ulm. However, the main forces of the Russo-Austrian alliance continued to retreat, leaving Napoleon facing logistical pressures and supply difficulties. Under these circumstances, the Battle of Austerlitz occurred. In this battle, Napoleon demonstrated his military genius. He set a trap, successfully luring the Allied forces into an attack, then swiftly counterattacked, cutting the coalition army in two. Ultimately, the French army achieved an overwhelming victory at a very low cost, while the coalition suffered heavy losses, including a significant number of troops and equipment. This victory not only solidified Napoleon's military status, but also forced Austria to accept French peace terms, including paying huge indemnities and the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, thereby altering the political landscape of Europe. Wilhelm Friedrich viewed Napoleon's rise with apprehension, but with the establishment of the Confederation of the Rhine, Prussia's core interests were directly threatened. With support from Britain and Russia, Prussia joined the Fourth Coalition against France in the following autumn, declaring war. However, the Prussian army's indecisiveness in strategy led to its rapid division and annihilation by Napoleon at the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt. The main Prussian force suffered a severe defeat under Davout's firm defense and Napoleon's timely support, leading to Napoleon's rapid march into Berlin. After its defeat, Prussia was forced to accept harsh terms from Napoleon, including territorial cessions and the establishment of the Duchy of Warsaw. Although Napoleon was victorious in the Battle of Eylau, he failed to decisively defeat Russia. However, his victories in Poland in 1807 compelled Russian Tsar Alexander Brave to seek peace, leading to the signing of a peace treaty. Moreover, to protect French industry, Napoleon issued the Berlin Decree, implementing the Continental System, which banned trade with Britain, further solidifying France's dominant position in Europe. Napoleon became the absolute ruler of Europe, serving as the leader of multiple countries, and appointed his brothers as kings of various nations, thus constructing a vast European empire. Dear viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. Today, we explored the beginnings of Napoleon's legendary career, from his early rise to becoming the ruler of the French Empire. In our first part, we witnessed how one man, with his extraordinary military talent and political acumen, rewrote the history of the whole of Europe. But every legendary story has its turning point. Stay tuned for our second part, where we delve into Napoleon's downfall and exile, and how an empire once invincible headed towards decline. From the flames of Moscow to the battlefields of Waterloo, we will uncover it all. But Napoleon's story doesn't just end there. His legacy, for better or for worse, still deeply affects us today. How has his influence shaped the modern world? What lessons do his thoughts and actions offer for our lives today? So, don't miss our upcoming episodes. If you like today's content, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any great content. Thank you again for watching. See you in our next episode. There's much more to Napoleon's story waiting for you to discover.